They say a dog knows when it's dying, but what if a dying dog could sense something far more dangerous than death itself? Emma Chen had given up on miracles the day her sister overdosed in a facility just like this one. Now she ran a sanctuary for dogs the world had already buried, dogs with cataracts, cancer, and hearts that beat on borrowed time. When Riverside Manor offered to pilot her Golden Companions program, she saw it as a final mercy. Let senior dogs spend their last days choosing their own human partners. She warned the staff, these aren't puppies, they're survivors, and survivors recognize their own. But when Copper, a blind, arthritic shepherd with a terminal diagnosis, entered the memory care wing, he didn't wag his tail or sniff for treats. He stood frozen in the doorway, his scarred ears rotating like radar dishes, before dragging Emma past 40 residents straight to a man strapped in a wheelchair, a man whose chart read, "No response to stimuli, 36 months." Then the blind dog did something that made Emma's blood turn to ice. He sat, raised his right paw, and held it there in perfect military salute. Why would a blind dog salute a man who couldn't see him? And what was Copper sensing that the doctors had missed for 3 years? Stay with us, because what this dying dog uncovered would expose a crime hidden in plain sight, and the only witnesses left were the ones nobody believed could remember. The Riverside Manor boardroom smelled like expensive leather and quiet desperation. Emma stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, her laptop displaying photos of graying muzzles and clouded eyes, while 6 board members sat in chairs that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Second Sunset Sanctuary specializes in hospice care for senior dogs, Emma began, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. What we're proposing is a pilot program, Golden Companions, where we bring our terminal dogs into your memory care wing and let them choose their own human partners. The board exchanged glances. One man checked his phone. Then Dr. Victoria Hartwell leaned forward, and the room went silent. She was younger than Emma expected, maybe 50, with silver hair styled in a precise bob and a navy suit that screamed Ivy League. Everything about her radiated controlled compassion, the kind that looked perfect in fundraising brochures. "Choose," Hartwell's smile was practiced, camera-ready. "You mean the dogs would select specific residents?" "Animals have instincts we've lost," Emma said. "They recognize loneliness, pain, fear. I've watched a 3-legged beagle ignore 20 people to sit with the one person who needed her most." She clicked to the next slide, a photo of Copper resting his head on a child's lap. "Our residents deserve dignity in their final days, and what's more dignified than being chosen?" Hartwell's smile widened, but Emma noticed something else. The CEO's left hand, resting on the table, had started to tremble, just slightly, just enough. "It's beautiful, really," Hartwell continued, already pivoting to her board, "where forgotten souls find each other. We'd be the first premium care facility in the state to offer this." She turned back to Emma. "How many dogs would you bring?" "5 to start, all terminal cases, all with less than 3 months." "Perfect." Hartwell pulled a liability waiver from her folder, and Emma watched as the CEO's trembling hand steadied itself to sign, but not before Emma saw what Hartwell had been holding beneath the table, a pill bottle, half empty, with no label. "Welcome to Riverside Manor, Ms. Chen. I think you'll find we take excellent care of our residents." Excellent care. Why would a CEO who markets compassion be afraid of a program designed to provide it? Emma had spent 3 years watching people die, and she knew the difference between nervous energy and guilty fear. Hartwell's hand wasn't shaking from excitement, it was shaking from control. Sometimes the people who speak loudest about mercy are the ones with the most to hide. And as Emma walked out of that boardroom with a side contract, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a deal with someone who viewed dignity as a product and witnesses as a liability. The memory care wing was too quiet for a room full of living people.
Emma guided 5 dogs through the automatic doors: a 3-legged beagle, an arthritic pit bull, a deaf collie, a cancer-ridden terrier, and Copper, who walked with the careful deliberation of someone navigating a world they couldn't see. The other dogs dispersed immediately, tails wagging cautiously as they sniffed wheelchairs and accepted gentle pets from trembling hands. The beagle settled beside a woman humming softly. The pit bull nuzzled a man's knee. But Copper froze, his scarred ears rotating like radar dishes, his clouded eyes fixed on nothing, his entire body vibrating with tension. Emma felt the leash go taut.
"Easy, boy," she whispered. He didn't ease. His nose worked overtime, pulling in air in sharp, deliberate bursts. A staff member approached with treats, cooing gently, but Copper's lip curled, not aggressive, warning. The woman backed away. Then he moved, not the shuffling gait of a blind, dying dog, but the purposeful stride of something on a mission. He pulled Emma past a dozen residents, ignored the nurses calling his name, dragged her through the common area with strength that shouldn't have existed in a body that frail. He stopped in front of a wheelchair tucked in the corner, partially hidden behind a plastic plant. The man slumped in it, wore pale blue pajamas, and had an oxygen tube beneath his nose. His chart, clipped to the chair's back, read, "Thomas Brennan, no response to stimuli, 36 months. His eyes stared at the wall, empty as museum glass. Copper sat, perfectly straight, and raised his right paw, holding it rigid at forehead level. A salute. Emma's breath caught. "Copper, what?" The dog didn't move, didn't lower his paw, just held the position with military precision, his blind eyes aimed directly at Thomas Brennan's face. Emma knelt beside the wheelchair, studying the catatonic man. 70, maybe 75, gray stubble, hands resting limp on the armrests. She reached out, gently placing her palm over his, and felt it, the faintest pressure, a squeeze, deliberate. Her eyes shot to Thomas's face. His expression hadn't changed, but a single tear tracked down his weathered cheek. "Mr. Brennan," Emma whispered. Copper lowered his paw and pressed his scarred muzzle into the man's lap. From somewhere deep in the dog's chest came a sound Emma had never heard, not a whimper, not a whine, a reunion. In the military, they call this target recognition. A trained dog can identify a handler by scent alone, even decades later, through age, through illness, through time itself. But Copper's shelter records listed him as a stray, never trained, never military. So why did a blind dog recognize a soldier who wasn't supposed to exist? And why was a man declared catatonic for 3 years, crying while squeezing the hand of a woman he'd never met? Emma sat in her truck outside Riverside Manor at 2 in the morning, laptop glow illuminating her face as she scrolled through VA records. Thomas Joseph Brennan, born 1949, enlisted 1968. Deceased March 15, 1971, Cambodia. She stared at the death certificate on her screen, then at the photo she'd taken on her phone. Thomas in his wheelchair, very much alive, with Copper's head in his lap. Dead men don't cry. The next morning, she returned during breakfast service when the staff was distracted. Copper walked beside her without a leash, navigating the hallways like he'd memorized them overnight. He led her straight to Thomas's room. The space was aggressively generic: beige walls, a narrow bed, a single window overlooking the parking lot. Emma searched quickly, her hospice training telling her where people hid things, behind picture frames, under mattresses, inside air vents. She found the folder taped to the underside of the nightstand drawer. Inside, a dishonorable discharge dated 1971, the signature redacted. A witness protection ID card with Thomas's photo and a different name, Michael Reeves.
and a photograph, edges yellowed with age, showing a young man in fatigues kneeling beside a German shepherd with intelligent dark eyes and a tan and black coat. The dog's tag was visible in the photo, Copper. Emma's hands shook as she turned to Thomas in his wheelchair. His eyes were still fixed on the wall, but his right hand rested on the armrest, fingers twitching. She placed her palm over his, and the twitches became deliberate, rhythmic. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. She'd learned Morse code when her sister was on a ventilator, too weak to speak. This was clearer. D-A-N-G-E-R, then W-A-T-C-H.
Emma's blood went cold. Who are you watching for? His fingers stopped. Started again. H-E-R. A knock at the door made Emma jump. Dr. Hartwell stood in the doorway, her smile bright as a scalpel. "Miss Chen, I didn't realize you had visiting privileges." Her eyes flicked to the folder in Emma's hand. "And I certainly didn't authorize you to go through patient belongings." Emma slid the folder behind her back. Copper growled, low, guttural, the first aggressive sound she'd heard from him. Hartwell's smile never wavered. "I think it's time for you and your dog to leave." Emma thought she'd rescued a dying stray from a county shelter's euthanasia list. But what if Copper wasn't a rescue at all? What if he'd been searching for 50 years for the one man who knew the truth? And what if the only living witness to a crime half a century old was a blind dog who'd spent decades waiting for one final mission? Emma spread the resident files across her kitchen table like a crime scene investigation. 5 dogs, 5 residents. She'd convinced the front desk coordinator to give her their names by claiming she needed them for her program documentation. Margaret Torres, chosen by the 3-legged beagle; Robert Kim, the arthritic pit bull; Diana Schultz, the death collie; James Morton, the cancer-ridden terrier; and Thomas Brennan, Copper. She ran their names through every database she could access. At first, nothing connected them. Different ages, different backgrounds, different medical histories. Margaret was 92, Robert was 68. No military service overlap, no shared hometown, no common employment. Then she found it, buried in the medical notes section of each file. Clarion 7 trial, active participant. Emma's hand stilled on the keyboard. She searched Clarion 7 and found a clinical trial registration for Meridian Pharma's new Alzheimer's drug, currently in Phase 3 testing. The trial coordinator listed Dr. Victoria Hartwell. Every single resident her dogs had chosen was enrolled. Emma grabbed her phone and called Margaret Torres's daughter. "Miss Torres, this is Emma Chen from the Golden Companions program. I had a question about your mother's medications." "I manage all of Mom's medications," the woman interrupted. "Why?" "The Clarion 7 trial. When did you consent to—" "What trial? Mom takes blood pressure medication and a multivitamin. That's it." Emma's stomach dropped. She called 3 more families. None of them knew about Clarion 7. None of them had signed consent forms. She drove to Riverside Manor during the night shift change when security was lax. The head nurse, Patricia Okonkwo, was a 20-year veteran Emma had chatted with during her program visits. She found her in the medication room, sorting pills. "Patricia, I need to ask you about Clarion 7. The nurse's face drained of color. The pill bottle in her hand clattered to the counter. "How do you know about—" Patricia's voice dropped to a whisper. "Emma, you need to leave, right now. The residents I brought dogs to, they're all in the trial, but their families never consented." Patricia's hands trembled as she reached for the counter to steady herself. "Dr. Hartwell told us they were standard vitamins, enhanced supplements for cognitive health. She said the families had approved everything during admission." Her eyes filled with tears. "We've been administering them for 8 months." The medication room door swung open. Dr. Hartwell stood in the hallway, her phone in her hand, her expression unreadable. "Miss Chen, my office. Now. Emma has found a pattern, a buried soldier, and a pharmaceutical cover-up. 5 dying dogs chose 5 residents, not randomly, but deliberately. The dogs aren't alerting to illness, they're alerting to evidence, to bodies being poisoned slowly under the guise of care. And someone very powerful wants that evidence to die quietly, along with anyone who discovers it. Dr. Hartwell's office was all glass and chrome, designed to project transparency. Emma stood before the desk while Hartwell made a phone call with her back turned, her voice too low to hear. When she finally sat down, her expression was sympathetic in the way only predators can manage. "Emma, I want to thank you for bringing this concern to my attention." Hartwell folded her hands on the desk. "I've reviewed the situation with our legal team and medical board, and unfortunately, we need to terminate the Golden Companions program immediately." Emma's heart hammered. "You can't—"
Unforeseen behavioral concerns. Hartwell's voice was smooth as poison. Your dog, Copper, has exhibited aggressive tendencies. He growled at staff, and frankly, your unauthorized access to patient files constitutes a serious HIPAA violation. She pressed a button on her desk phone. We could pursue legal action, but I'm willing to let this go quietly if you remove your animals from the premises within the hour. 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. Emma wanted to scream, to fight, to demand answers, but she'd worked in healthcare long enough to know when a battle was already lost. She collected the 5 dogs from the memory care wing while staff watched in silence. The beagle whimpered as she was pulled away from Margaret. The pit bull planted his paws, refusing to leave Robert Kim. Copper stood rigid at Thomas Brennan's wheelchair, and when Emma tried to coax him away, the blind dog's legs locked. She had to physically lift all 70 pounds of dying shepherd into her arms. As she carried him out, she looked back. Thomas's hand was moving, fingers tapping the armrest in deliberate rhythm. R-U-N. That night, Emma sat in her sanctuary office, surrounded by sleeping dogs and failed dreams. Her laptop chimed with a new email from an unknown sender. No subject line, no message, just a video attachment. She clicked it, and her world collapsed. The timestamp read 6 years ago. The location, Riverside Manor, Memory Care Wing. And there, in grainy surveillance footage, was her sister, Lily, 24 years old, thin as paper, sitting in a common room while a nurse administered pills from an unmarked bottle. The nurse turned toward the camera. Patricia Okonkwo. The video cut to Lily seizing, to staff rushing in, to a gurney being wheeled out at 3 a.m. with a black body bag. The final frame froze on a document, Meridian Pharma Clinical Trial, Clarion 7 Prototype, subject Lily Chen. Dr. Hartwell's signature at the bottom. What would you do if you discovered the same people who killed your sister were still killing, and this time you had the proof? Emma had spent 6 years believing Lily's overdose was her own fault, her own choice. But what if it wasn't addiction? What if it was murder dressed up as care? And what if the only witnesses left were 5 dying dogs and a ghost soldier who'd been playing dead for 3 years? Emma watched from her truck as the Riverside Manor fire alarm triggered at 11:47 p.m. Staff poured out in rehearsed confusion, shepherding residents in wheelchairs toward the parking lot assembly point. But something was wrong. The evacuation was too organized, too calm, and she counted the wheelchairs twice. Someone was missing. Thomas Brennan. She waited until the last staff member exited, then slipped through the side entrance, using the key card she'd lifted from Patricia's coat 2 days ago. The hallways were dark, except for emergency lighting casting everything in red. The alarm had stopped, leaving only eerie silence. She found Copper first. The storage closet near the medication room was barely large enough for cleaning supplies, but someone had shoved the blind dog inside. He was lying on his side, panting heavily, his body too still.
On the metal shelf above him sat a syringe filled with pink liquid and a vial labeled pentobarbital, euthanasia solution. No, no! Emma dropped to her knees, running her hands over Copper's body. He was alive, just sedated. She scooped him into her arms. He felt lighter than before, as if death was already claiming pieces of him. Movement at the end of the hall made her freeze. 2 orderlies were wheeling Thomas Brennan toward the medical wing, not the direction of the evacuation, the opposite direction, toward the basement level where Emma had seen the pharmaceutical storage during her initial tour. She started to follow, Copper heavy in her arms, when every door in the facility slammed shut simultaneously, electronic locks engaging with mechanical precision. The lights cut out, emergency lighting died, complete darkness. Then Dr. Hartwell's voice filled the building through the intercom system, calm and clinical. "Miss Chen, you're trespassing on private property. Security has been notified. I strongly suggest you remain where you are."
Emma's blood turned to ice. This wasn't a fire drill, it was a trap. Copper stirred in her arms, his clouded eyes opening, his nose working despite the sedation. He made a low sound in his throat, not fear, recognition. His paw scraped weakly against Emma's jacket, pointing down the hallway where Thomas had disappeared. Footsteps echoed from multiple directions, heavy boots, not medical staff, not facility security, something else. "The building is now in containment protocol," Hartwell's voice continued. "Any attempt to leave will be considered a threat." Emma pressed herself against the wall, her mind racing through her hospice training. She'd helped dozens of people die with dignity. She'd never planned on becoming one of them. In witness protection, they call this containment. When a protected witness is compromised, you lock down the site, eliminate the threat, and erase the records. Standard protocol. No survivors, no evidence, no investigation. Emma wasn't dealing with a doctor anymore. She was dealing with a cleaner, and cleaners don't leave loose ends. Copper's sedation was wearing off faster than it should have. The blind dog slipped from Emma's arms and pressed his nose to the floor, tracking something only he could sense. His body moved with sudden purpose, pulling her away from the main corridor toward a service door she'd never noticed, the maintenance tunnels. Emma followed, her phone's flashlight cutting through darkness thick as water. The tunnels were a maze of pipes and concrete, but Copper navigated them like a map was burned into his dying brain. Left, right, straight for 30 feet, another left. They emerged in the administrative wing. Copper stopped at a door with a brass nameplate, Dr. Victoria Hartwell, Chief Executive Officer. He pawed at it once, then sat, waiting. Emma tried the handle, locked. She used her elbow to smash the frosted glass panel, reached through and opened it from the inside. Her hand came away bleeding, but she barely noticed. The office was exactly what she had expected. Leather furniture, awards lining the walls, degrees from Johns Hopkins and Harvard. But it was the filing cabinets that made her breath catch. 4 of them, all unlocked, as if Hartwell never imagined anyone would make it this far. Emma pulled open the first drawer. Trial data. 87 resident files, each one marked Clarion-7, unauthorized. Consent forms with forged signatures, death reports labeled natural decline for residents who'd been healthy 6 months prior. Adverse reaction logs that should have triggered FDA shutdown but were buried under falsified reports. The second drawer held financial records, wire transfers from Meridian Pharma, $2 million, $4 million, $7 million over 6 years. The third drawer made Emma's knees buckle. Video logs, surveillance footage time-stamped and cataloged. She recognized faces, Margaret Torres convulsing in her sleep, Robert Kim's nose bleeding during breakfast, Diana Schultz collapsing in the hallway. And there, file dated 6 years ago, Chen, Lily,
Trial failure. Subject deceased. Emma's hands shook as she opened the fourth drawer. Inside was a single framed photograph, clearly precious enough to hide. It showed a younger Victoria Hartwell in a sleek pantsuit, shaking hands with a silver-haired man in an expensive suit. The caption read, "First Trial, 1999, Meridian Pharma Partnership." But it was the background that destroyed Emma. A group of trial participants sitting in a common room, young people, addiction recovery patients judging by their wristbands. And there, third from the left, was an 18-year-old girl with dark hair and Emma's eyes. Lily. Emma's sister hadn't been part of a 6-year trial. She'd been part of the first trial, 27 years ago, before Emma even knew Lily was using, before Emma became a hospice worker, before everything. Copper's growl snapped Emma back to the present. The dog was staring at the doorway, his ears flattened against his skull. Footsteps in the hallway, multiple sets, getting closer. Emma pulled out her phone, aimed it at the filing cabinets, and started recording everything. Her hands moved frantically, pulling files, photographing documents, her mind finally understanding what the dogs had known all along. The dogs weren't choosing partners, they were choosing witnesses, the only 5 residents whose brains were still intact enough to testify because they'd been given placebos instead of the poison. Thomas, Margaret, Robert, Diana, and James weren't victims of the trial. They were the control group, the ones who could prove what Hartwell had done to the other 82.
Emma's phone was already streaming to 3 platforms when the office door burst open. The security team found her surrounded by scattered files, her face illuminated by the glow of her screen as 40,000 viewers watched in real time. Copper stood between Emma and the men, his blind eyes fierce, his dying body refusing to yield. "FBI is en route," Emma said, her voice steady. "You're live on the internet, all of you." The men froze. One reached for his radio. Another backed toward the door. Dr. Hartwell appeared behind them, her composure finally cracking. "Turn that off. Turn it off now." 87 residents, Emma said to the camera, to the growing audience. 27 years of illegal trials. My sister was one of the first. Her name was Lily Chen, and she was 18 years old when Meridian Pharma used her as a test subject without consent. The sound of sirens cut through the night. Federal agents flooded Riverside Manor 16 minutes later. Emma was still streaming when they placed handcuffs on Victoria Hartwell, still recording when they found Thomas Brennan in the basement medical wing, strapped to a gurney with an IV in his arm. The man who hadn't spoken in 3 years looked directly at the camera and said, in a voice rough from disuse, "My name is Thomas Joseph Brennan. I witnessed Meridian Pharma's first illegal drug trial in 1971 in a military field hospital in Cambodia. They told me I died. They told everyone I died. But I've been here, watching, waiting for someone to listen." The VA records confirmed it 3 days later. Corporal Thomas Brennan and his service dog, Copper, were reported killed in action March 15, 1971. Both were placed in witness protection after Thomas testified against military personnel involved in the pharmaceutical conspiracy. They were separated, Thomas to a new identity, Copper to a training facility that was supposed to keep him safe. 50 years, 2 lives erased. 1 soldier and 1 dog, both presumed dead, both waiting for the moment when a blind shepherd would recognize his handler's heartbeat across the impossible distance of time. The congressional hearing was held 6 months later. Emma's Second Sunset Sanctuary had become a nationally recognized therapy and witness protection program for animals. The other 4 dogs sat with their chosen residents in the gallery, Margaret, Robert, Diana, and James, all healthy now, all testifying.
but it was the image on the front page of every newspaper that captured the moment. Copper, thin and gray, his body finally surrendering, resting his head on Thomas Brennan's lap as the old soldier placed his hand on his dog's scarred muzzle one final time. Copper died that night, in the man's arms, his mission complete. 3 weeks later, Emma brought a new dog to the sanctuary's first official session, a 3-legged beagle with bright eyes and a tail that wouldn't stop wagging. Emma had named her Lily. The beagle ignored the first dozen residents, then stopped in front of a woman who hadn't smiled in 4 years. The woman reached down with trembling fingers, touched the dog's soft ears, and laughed, a sound like breaking glass, like resurrection. Emma watched through tears as Lily chose her person, as another forgotten soul found a witness. They say dogs don't live long enough, but maybe they live just long enough to remind us what we've forgotten, that the most broken among us often see the clearest, that loyalty doesn't have an expiration date, that sometimes the smallest acts of faithfulness can bring down empires built on silence, and that love, real love, doesn't ask permission or wait for approval. It simply chooses, and in choosing, it saves us all. If this story touched your heart, there's someone in your life who needs to hear it too. Share this with a friend who's ever felt forgotten, who's ever fought for someone no one else believed in, or who knows that the most broken things sometimes carry the most beautiful truths. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss stories about the ones who refuse to give up, on animals, on people, on hope itself. And tell us in the comments, have you ever witnessed a moment where an animal chose someone who desperately needed to be chosen? Your story matters. We're listening.